Welcome to Front Office Pros. Today, we're going to be talking about rookie ADP and comparing the 2024 draft to the 2025 draft.
Hike!
Now, for some of you at home, you may be asking, well, why does this really matter? Well, depending on the draft class, it really changes our perception of rookie talent. And as you're thinking about planning for your dynasty rosters ahead, you've got to think about a first round pick in 2024 looks a lot different than a first round pick in 2025 and a first round pick in 2026. Different players come out, there's different strengths of each class. We're going to be talking about each position and how it's different from the year prior, and maybe what you may be thinking about for the following year if you're really planning ahead. So, Joe, let's talk about the first position group, which is the quarterbacks. In one of our most recent episodes, we talked about a few of these quarterbacks in our Superflex mock, Jalen Milroe, Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward. Other than that, really not too many exciting players here. I mean, some may like Quinn Ewers, although I thought, very disappointing in this past season, as well as Jackson Dart. He's a dart throw, that he's a possibility as far as Ole Miss goes. I think he could rise. But if you look at this class compared to last year's class, Joe, it's not even the same stratosphere. He had 6 quarterbacks drafted in the first round. Caleb Williams, who was kind of heralded as this next Patrick Mahomes type of quarterback. You don't have anything like that. He went number 1. You had Jane Daniels number 2. May was drafted in is 3. So all those guys were probably in super flex leagues. They were taken in your first round. Probably Bo Nix and Michael Penix might have been taken in the second round. J.J. McCarthy probably slipped in the first round. But when you look at the two classes, if you were hoping for a quarterback, I hope you drafted one last year because this is not the draft, I think, for you to prioritize here.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not the draft to prioritize. And if you needed a quarterback, like you mentioned, you definitely should have been aggressive and got it last year because I don't know when we're going to see a highly touted class like that. And they, performed pretty well. I know Caleb had an up and down rookie year, maybe with Ben Johnson, he turns it around. But as far as this year, I think you may just want to, wait for the quarterback position. I know people like Jackson Dart and he's potentially rising. I might just kind of stick around and maybe you take a flyer on like a Will Howard or Riley Leonard later in drafts as guys like they're pretty decent passers, but then also have the mobility and could be getting you in the run game. I mean, you saw how Notre Dame started the game against Ohio State in the national championship game, really utilizing his legs a lot. So I like both of their kind of athleticism and rushing abilities as well. So, in the first round, maybe you go after a stud running back or take one of these wide receivers and then maybe wait later and take a guy like Will Howard or Riley Leonard.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would recommend you don't reach. There's no reason to. Maybe Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward, those guys kind of fall in your drafts. Maybe you could get them towards the back end of the first round. Maybe at that point it's worth drafting them, but definitely don't reach. I think that's the thing with super flex leagues. People are like, "Oh, I got to draft a quarterback. I have to have one." It's like, I get it, but at the same time, if they bust in 3 or 4 years, think about the class. Just even a few years ago, Trevor Lawrence, he's been a disappointment. Zach Wilson's a bust. Fields is a bust. Trey Lance is a bust. So it's like Mac Jones is a bust. So you could have been like, "Oh, I'm going to draft these quarterbacks," and what good did it do you?
Yeah, hard to believe in that 2022 class. Like the guy you'd want is Brock Purdy.
I know, this is crazy. But I mean, at the end of the day, though, if you are interested in quarterback, I'd say, hey, hit the pause button. Look at 2026. You've got, Arch Manning's going to be starting here. Does he declare? Right? There's a lot of buzz around him. You've got Nico Imalavia from Tennessee, right? I believe he was a former 5-star recruit, 6'6", 215. He's got some really good ability. Lenora Sellers from South Carolina, Garrett Nussmeier from LSU. You got Drew Aller from Penn State. Carson Beck decided to go back. Now he's in Miami. Does he kind of make himself look better after disappointing year in Georgia? So a lot more intriguing names, I feel like, in the next class. So I would say, based on, we're going to be talking about some other position groups, I would just say in general, try to hold off on reaching on quarterbacks. That's my message for quarterbacks.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, and I think even next year I'm still holding off, and I'm not a believer in many of those guys that you just rattled off there. So,
Not even Arch Manning. We haven't even seen much of him.
well, Arch Manning, yeah, he's probably the most intriguing, but some of those other guys, like I don't know, I got my doubts on Carson Beck and the Drew Halers of the world.
Interesting. Are you enjoying this episode so far? Well, if you are, subscribe to our YouTube channel, smash that like button, and hit the notification bell for upcoming videos. We do videos throughout the year, so you're not going to want to miss what we have in store. So going to our next position group, let's talk about the running backs, Joe. This is a very exciting group. I think it's the crown jewel of the class. You've got just some really, really interesting players. You've got Ashton Jeanty from Boise State. I know we got quite a response about him recently. I think he could have a lot of promise. I know you do too, Joe. We'll find out. But you've got some really good, interesting guys here. Omarion Hampton from North Carolina, Caleb Johnson from Iowa. Both the running backs from Ohio State, Travion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins. We didn't even talk about some of these other guys, Joe. Even guys like Devin Neal from Kansas. But if you look at what the running back class was the year prior, it wasn't very good. And honestly, it was historically not good. Because if you look at it, I think we had talked about how Jonathan Brooks was the second latest running back ever drafted in the common draft era. So I mean that tells you right from the jump the NFL teams were not prioritizing this class. But you had Jonathan Brooks, Jalen Wright. He didn't really show up. Trey Benson didn't show up. Marshawn Lynn was injured all year. Ray Davis showed some promise. Braylon Allen showed more promise than we thought. Nothing from Audric Estime. Honestly, the best guys were Tyrone Tracy and Bucky Irving.
Yeah.
So, really disappointing class for as far as running backs go. This is a breath of fresh air for 2025. And I think you're going to be seeing a lot of running backs draft in the first round. And I would tell you, if you're in need of one, this is the year to get one and maybe double up.
Yeah, I could see that. And, you mentioned Bucky Irving and Tyrone Tracy. Those are also the two guys that got the most amount of opportunities and snaps. But, I mean, that also could just send a message, too, of how these other teams felt about some of these other backs. But, I mean, for a guy like Blake Hormy stuck behind Kyron Williams, I think the same things kind of goes for, Benson in Arizona behind James Conner. So it's just interesting how some of these teams treated these running back, but there's definitely concerns for like Marshawn Lloyd and Jonathan Brooks with the injury histories. But like you mentioned, this upcoming draft class is, far better. It's, highly held in high regard here, highly hyped with all these guys, Ashton Jeanty at the top. And then I'm interested in see like how the draft process goes for Cam Scadabo, a guy who's risen up in people's eyes based on, the college football playoffs and how well he performed in those games.
Well, it's interesting too because running backs, I think, have more of a tendency to just have a breakout year and all of a sudden they're in the conversation. So hard to
Yep.
really know what it looks like for 2026. But I will tell you with certainty, 2025 is infinitely better to 2024. I think it's reminiscent to the 2017 class. We talked about this recently. You saw the likes of Christian McCaffrey, Leonard Fournette, Dalvin Cook, Joe Mixon, Aaron Jones, right? I mean, the list went on. And these guys were, honestly, it was an era of where running backs were just supreme, that they did so well. And now you're kind of, the running back landscape is, you're seeing more two backfields, two running back backfields, not really just a bell cow. This may change with this class. I think it's a really, really good one. And we've seen too with Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, these running backs that went in for agency, teams decided to sign them and they did wonders for their team. So, do GMs kind of reevaluate that running back position and the impact it has on teams?
That's what I'm curious about. And just even seeing between the free agency and just seeing the impact of what like a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs has done for the Detroit Lions. A lot of people are criticizing with how highly they drafted him. And he just looks like an absolute superstar in that offense. So curious between the free agent class and how these other highly drafted running backs in the past have done, if that kind of has changed in GM's minds and their attitudes towards the running back position.
So let's talk about the wide receiver position. This class is a good one. I wouldn't say it's great. We talked about some of them. I think honestly, one of the things that we really have to discover is where's Travis Hunter going to play? Is Travis Hunter going to play wide
Yeah.
receiver? Is he going to play corner? I think whatever happens with him and the NFL team that drafts him, what they decide to do with him, could have a huge bearing on the top end talent, anyways, as far as wide receiver goes for this draft. But you got Ted McMillan out of Arizona. We talked about him recently. Luther Burden. Some interesting other players. We talked about some of them. But Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State, Trey Harris, Isaiah Bond from Texas. Tez Johnson from Oregon, Xavier Restrepo from Miami. Definitely some different intriguing prospects, but it fails in comparison to last year's class. I mean, last year's wide receiver class honestly might be one of the best class that I honestly can remember in the last 15 years or so that I've been playing fantasy football. I mean, this is just an incredible class. You have Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Roma Dunze, Brian Thomas, Lad McConkey. I mean, to think, Brian Thomas and Lad McConkey had even better years than Robo Dunze and Marvin Harrison. I think those guys are just budding. I think even possibly next year we could see those two taking even a larger jump. But even the bottom end of the draft, you had guys like Keon Coleman, Ricky Pearsall, Adonai Mitchell, Xavier Worthy. Troy Franklin, even from Denver. I mean, there's just really a lot of intriguing options. I think it's a good class. It's not as, if you didn't take advantage of taking a receiver last year, I'm sorry. I feel like you had your head in the sand because to me, like it was a crown jewel of a class, and there are some good players here, but just fails in comparison.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's hard to duplicate or even, being able to duplicate last year's wide receiver class and quarterback class. I mean, that's two of the weaker groups in this 2025 class compared to 2024, no doubt about it. While there's some, like you mentioned, there's some, it's more just top heavy. You got this year's draft class, you got some of the interesting names at the top, like you mentioned, but then just after that, the, talent gap really starts to show itself pretty early, where last year's, I mean, the list was going on, and even if you didn't get one of the top guys, like you mentioned, grabbing a Lad McConkey or Brian Thomas Jr., even those guys later paid dividends for you.
Well, I know you feel similar to me in this, but I'm a firm believer, and you see this a lot of times, even in NFL GMs. I'm a believer that you draft based on best player available. I don't draft based on need. I try not to. I try to look at my needs, and if it's a coin flip between two players, I'll lean towards the need. But otherwise, I'm going to go best player available. So because you don't know, I mean, we can predict what we think will happen in the 2026 class, but we really don't know. So,
Yeah.
and we don't know who's going to declare. I mean, you've got some interesting players in 2026. Obviously, the guy we're all going to be looking forward to is that wide receiver in Ohio State, Joe, Jeremiah Smith. I mean, he's an
He's just a
unbelievable
freshman,
player.
though. I'm going to have to wait for him.
No, I know you're going to have to wait we're looking at 2027 probably more than likely. But all I'm saying is, take the best player available in this class. Running backs right now, we haven't talked about tight ends, but running backs are just so dominant in this class. I think it's a mistake not to draft where the strong, whatever the deepest part of the class is. You got to take advantage. You got to take a bite of that apple.
Yeah, for sure. You definitely do. I mean, the tough part is, drafting best player available sounds great, but it's kind of a luxury, if you can or not. I mean, sometimes you might be okay at running back. I know you'd probably say take one anyways. I mean, that's what, the real good NFL GMs have always said, like just take best player available, even if you don't need it. But I could see that, if people have a decent amount of running backs on their dynasty team and want to snag one of these wide receivers or something instead.
I get that, but at the same time, it's like, then trade one of your running backs. Draft a running back, get them in the pipeline, and trade one of your running backs. Like at the end of the day, running back, it seems like they don't fall off trees. So if you've got a guy like, I don't know, I'm trying to think off the top of my head a guy that would be kind of an intriguing a guy like Josh Jacobs. Go ahead and draft one of these running backs, Travion Henderson, and then trade Josh Jacobs, see if you can't get a receiver. And if you have other running backs, then I would say that makes more sense than reaching for a receiver or a different position. You can utilize the draft and trading when it comes to dynasty.
Yeah, no, that's pretty good advice. I like the idea of trading running back and getting the wide receivers, and then go ahead and kind of resetting that clock, which we know isn't that long for the running back position with a rookie.
So in our last position group here for the offensive side, we're going to be looking at the tight end position. Now, if you look at the 2024 season, it was Brock Bowers, and I honestly was kind of I think you and I both. I think we too heavily dismissed Brock Bowers because of his landing spot with the Las Vegas Raiders. We knew that he was going to be a top line talent, had the ability to be like a Sam Laporta, but we didn't think that he would be able to do it on the Raiders. But he defied the odds, and he had an incredible year. But he was a guy who was probably in your top 7, I'm going to guess, in your rookie drafts. But after that, it was pretty much a huge cliff after that. I mean, you had Jatavion Sanders going to Carolina, Cade Stover in Houston, Benson on in Washington, Theo Johnson in New York. I mean, these are all kind of flyer guys. Nobody that really will get you all that excited. Now, this class, I think this is also a very strong class. This is an opportunity. Now, the tough part is I think the tight end position has become one of the toughest positions to really figure out your strategy for, because so many people are turned off by the tight end, especially in the beginning of the year, because nobody was performing. So why am I going to invest a first-round pick or something in a tight end when I can draft one? Now, Brock Bowers is a completely different story, and there's nobody in this class like Brock Bowers. He's elite.
Yeah.
So I think that's a tough part. But if you look at the class, Joe, I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are, but I mean, there was definitely some names that are interesting. We talked about Tyler Warren, in our most recent episode. You got your guy, Joe Colston Loveland from Michigan, Harold Fannin Jr., a lot of buzz for him with his receiving skills and as athleticism out of Bowling Green. Got Jason Taylor's son, Mason Taylor, from LSU. So a lot of intriguing names for the tight end position. How are you approaching the tight ends for this class?
And a lot different than last year. There, like you mentioned, it was really Brock Bowers and kind of endless. As far as what everyone wanted, he was the superstar tight end. But this year it's a little different. I mean, I think we'll see how different things play out with the draft process and kind of who goes up. But obviously the big buzz around it. The number one guy is Tyler Warren for sure, but I'm interested in seeing you're talking about receiving ability at the tight end. And I'm interested to see how the draft process goes for somebody like Arondé Gadsden from Syracuse. He's shown to be a dominant player, had some injury history there, but with Kyle McCord there, he was their go-to guy, and really, really interesting target and guy I'm going to keep my eye on through this process.
That's another name I didn't even mention. He's also on that radar as well. So much deeper tight end class.
Yeah.
I think we talked at least 5-6 deep that we feel could make an impact, could be a starter at the next level, not like what happened last year. So tight end is definitely a deeper class, I think, that we've seen in quite some time.
Yeah, I mean, there's still some guys from last year that I think could be interesting, just need more time development-wise. But, I mean, everybody knew as a freshman that Brock Bowers was just going to be an absolute stud and superstar in the NFL. And he really showed it despite, you and I not being excited about the Las Vegas Raiders landing spot, just how they were going to utilize them and, the quarterback position. But he showed that it just doesn't matter.
So that does it for this episode. We tried to give you an analysis and a comparison of the 2024 class and the 2025 class. Hopefully that you found that helpful as you're strategizing. We've got a long way to go before we're even at the combine, the draft, all that. We've got a long time before you have your rookie draft. So there's going to be a lot of moving pieces coming up here, but you can at least start thinking about, what am I going to prioritize maybe start thinking about how I'm going to move things around on my roster, because like we talked about in this episode, every year is different. A first round pick, a top 5 pick in this year's class compared to next year's class, compared to the year after that, it varies drastically. So you have to be able to pivot. Thanks so much for tuning in, and until next time.